This is the Secular Nation Podcast, an official production of the Atheist Alliance of America, bringing you breaking news and stories about the intersection of the atheist free thought movement and government action. Hey everybody, this is Secular Nation. I'm your host, Justin Clark. I'm here with my co-host, Jeremy Casey. How's it going, sir?
It is going great. How's it going with you?
Not too bad. It has been a very busy few weeks. We've been doing a bunch of different episodes. We have a couple extra episodes added to the YouTube page right now that were recorded by Aaron Raw and Dr. Rivera and Justin Scott, so go check those out. I do have just a quick housekeeping note to make at the top of the podcast. The Atheist Alliance of America website, atheistallianceamerica.org, is undergoing some construction right now. We're changing it up. We're mixing up some of the old stuff and trying to improve our website. So if the podcast feed, like our iTunes feed or our Stitcher feed, is a little behind, don't worry, because it will be updated within a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks tops. But for right now, the best way to listen to these as soon as they come out is on the Atheist Alliance of America's YouTube page. If you just go to YouTube, type in Atheist Alliance of America, you can subscribe to our YouTube page there, and you can listen to all the newest episodes.
That's
and
right.
That's right.
And we're also attempting to make the episodes a little bit more timeless. So if a couple of those seem not timely because recent events have moved so fast, in the future we will try to make it a little less. You need to listen to it the day it drops. So there's also
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And with that in mind, Jeremy and I are going to be doing a very special episode tonight that is basically going to be an entire episode devoted to one subject, and is President Donald Trump. Never going to get used to saying that, but President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch. We've kind of done a deep dive. We've read a lot of pieces on Neil Gorsuch, and we're going to kind of share with you kind of his background and what you need to know about him going forward. So just as a quick bio of Gorsuch, I think he's 49 or he'll be 50 this year.
Yeah, he'll be 50.
And he was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit in 2006 by President Bush. He was confirmed unanimously by the Senate, including 11 Democrats who are still in the Senate, which the White House press release just so kindly reminds you. And he was also the principal deputy associate attorney general in 2005, and he also clerked for Justice Byron White and Justice Anthony Kennedy, who is still on the court. And in many ways, Gorsuch represents what to many conservatives looks like as the heir apparent to the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And their policy prescriptions are quite similar. So just as a quick bio there, he's from Colorado. He is an active hunter and gamesman, I guess how you would call that.
I like
sportsman, gamer.
Let's start calling him gamer. I don't know if they'll like that, but I like that.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. And he has his law degree is from Harvard. He has undergraduate degrees from Columbia. While he was at Columbia, he started a student newspaper called The Fed, which was short for The Federalist. And in his student newspaper, he was known for his incisive wit and his often firebrand-esque conservative political commentary. And then he also has a PhD in philosophy from Harvard. Not Harvard, but a PhD in philosophy from Oxford University, which he got in 2004. His PhD dissertation was actually on aid in dying or assisted suicide. And he argues against it and sort of argues for a fundamental defense of human life. So that's the closest we kind of know about his position, what his position might be on abortion rights, because he's not actually ruled all that much on abortion or women's health, except for one particular thing, which we'll come back to later. So, Jeremy, what are your first impressions of Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch?
Well, I think besides the context of, it's almost been 2 years now since Antonin Scalia died. Yeah. On a hunting retreat. I mean, he seems like his own man, so I appreciate that. It seems like he has some principles about him, whether or not I agree with him on every case. He definitely isn't a Betsy DeVos type of nomination, where he's unqualified in any way. He's definitely super qualified. I mean, I like the quote where he said it was about the pigeonhole. You know, people do unexpected things. Pigeonholes ignore gray areas in the law. Something he said. So slightly unexpected, but definitely, if you imagine what Scalia would do, it's probably a pretty good guess that Gorsuch will do the same thing. So I don't like that, but I mean, it's not the worst pick I could imagine at all. So that's kind of first impressions.
Sure, I pretty much agree. I mean, my first impression about reading about Gorsuch was, if you're a conservative, if you are a Republican, and you were reticent about voting for Donald Trump, but did it anyway because you thought you could get a better Supreme Court nominee than Obama had in Merrick Garland and Hillary Clinton might have had in her presidency, then you got exactly what you wanted.
Yeah, you were definitely vindicated if you were in that camp.
Absolutely. And there was some polling that a very large disproportionate amount of Republican voters said that one of the main reasons why they sort of held their nose and voted for Trump, if they were not full Trump supporters, was for the Supreme Court. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, one of the things he did early on President Trump did early on to sort of assuage the evangelical right in the Republican Party was to release a list of potential Supreme Court nominees, and Gorsuch was one of them. I'm not surprised at all by this pick. I think that, honestly, if you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, this is one of the best choices that could have ever been made. I think, which is crazy. I always think that anytime that President Trump gets something right from his side, I feel like he's doing it accidentally.
Oh, yeah. Or somebody else is pulling that string and he just was along for the ride. This is
absolutely
too important of a decision, given the context of why voters wanted to get a Republican, wanted to hold up the process for, a year and a half? It was over a year. It was about a year and a half. That it definitely is a fantastic pick for that, which makes me think that there was strategy by people who know what they're doing, as opposed to Trump, who's has Bannon on his team on the National Security Council. So I can't imagine that he was in any way in the decision-making meetings on this. He said he read all of his briefs. I don't believe that either.
I don't believe that either, even though I will say that Neil Gorsuch writes his legal opinions in a rather straightforward, often conversational style. In one piece I read about him from the Washington Post, they noted that he started using contractions. And everybody kind of thought that was weird because it's very sort of unconventional to use contractions in legal proceedings or legal documents. You're absolutely right about sort of the preparation. There was a great piece that came out of the New York Times back in early February about conservative groups unified to push Neil Gorsuch's confirmation. There were multiple different groups, whether it was the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Koch brothers, the National Rifle Association, the Family Research Council. All of these conservative political action groups were very much united in their support for a conservative justice to replace Scalia. And in so much fact that even before Gorsuch was picked, they all bought domains for all of the people who were on Trump's list, and Gorsuch was one of them. So you're absolutely right, Jeremy. I mean, it seems to me like if you are on the conservative side of this debate, it seems to me like you won, in the sense that if you were worried about some of the things Trump would do, this was one of the things you didn't have to worry about because it completely went exactly the way you wanted it to. The travel ban didn't really do it. The wall didn't really do it. The repeal of the Affordable Care Act probably wasn't going to be easy, but this was something that was extremely easy. And if I was a Republican voter, I would feel quite good about this decision. Having said all of that, this guy is not good on church-state issues. Particularly, his focus is on public displays of faith. So he decided to write a dissenting opinion of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals when they decided not to hear a case involving a public display of the Ten Commandments on a courthouse. He used the standard argument that Scalia had used in the past, as well as sort of swing vote Justice Anthony Kennedy used in a case in New York. I forget the name of the case, but it involved school prayer, not school prayer, but prayer in public meetings. And the one thing that he sort of noted is the historical nature of a Ten Commandments and sort of the primacy of the law and tradition as to why it would be okay to display that. He also filed a dissent against a court ruling that had crosses removed from highways. I mean, this is a guy who kind of in some respects does respect like the First Amendment in terms of free speech, because he does have a decent record on free speech. But when it comes to these displays of religion, he's not the guy that people can feel confident with on the secular side of the argument. These are kind of the things to think about with Gorsuch. I think the other thing to keep in mind that's interesting is there are two places. There are two specific places where Gorsuch will not actually be, might not be, let me preface that, he might not be as conservative as people expect him to be. One of them is on the issue of gay rights. He has been known in the past to hold very sort of private feelings about gay rights that are not the mainstream conservative Republican viewpoint. He has a best friend who is gay, who's now married and was very, very kind to him. He's been very kind to other gay people, including staffers and clerks who've worked for him. This was another story kind of outlined in the New York Times by Cheryl Gay Stolberg. The article is called Gorsuch Not Easy to Pigeonhole on Gay Rights, which is true. But the big question I think that we have to ask about Gorsuch on LGBT issues is, regardless of what his personal feelings may be, and his personal feelings may be extremely positive and maybe extremely good, who knows? But what are his legal feelings? And if you look at what his record is on legal feelings, on legal proceedings, he's a little bit different in the sense that he has very much stood in favor of what the Trump administration wants to do, which is to pull back some reforms that the Obama administration instituted that would help fight discrimination against LGBT federal workers or contractors. And he's also talked about the problems of quote unquote liberals sort of legislating from the bench, which is sort of a very common conservative bromine that he said in a piece for the National Review about 10 years ago. The other thing that makes him, I think, a little different than what conservatives are expecting is actually not something that will make him more liberal than Scalia, as the gay rights issue might. I think that if Gorsuch is confirmed to the Supreme Court, I have a feeling that he's either going to be similar to Scalia on LGBT issues, or he might completely buck the trend altogether and be more of like a Justice Anthony Kennedy and sort of a conservative voice for equality for LGBT Americans.
Now,
I mean, who knows?
I was reading into that, and his primary attitude is towards giving religious business owners and religious individuals, but more so business owners, kind of complete say over how they want to run that, how they want to run their business, what kind of. I feel like he may not be a homophobe in his personal life, but he's going to tend towards protecting homophobic tendencies. I mean, I definitely think that if my money would be on that, so I don't think he's going to go the Kennedy route. I think he'll remain the Scalia route on that issue, as far as I can tell.
I think you're right. And part of the reason I think that is because if you look at his previous opinions regarding religious liberty and how he views religious liberty in an extremely broad sense, one that I would say is not supported by the First Amendment, particularly his concurrence of opinion with the Hobby Lobby v. Burwell decision of 2014, which said that private organizations, private businesses could discriminate against its employees and could deny them contraceptive coverage under the Affordable Care Act mandate. He was also very much in support of the Little Sisters of the Poor decision, which even further pushed reproductive health back by allowing the Sisters of the Poor to not even have to fill out paperwork in regards to exempting them from the contraceptive mandate. So on that level, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that Gorsuch may have personal feelings about LGBT Americans, which are quite acceptable and that are not a problem. I think it would be a stretch to call him a homophobe. I don't think he is.
Oh, one. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
But I would say, I think you're absolutely right, which is that his judicial thinking can support homophobia or transphobia.
And his entire legal career has been one of taking out his personal opinions in deference to the law. So regardless of how he lives his life personally at all, and I think this is a good thing for a judge, but in this case, I think he's definitely protecting conservative Christian values first over religious freedom for any other group, and definitely in the secular world, I don't think he cares at all about that. So while it's good that he takes his personal feelings out of his judging, in my opinion, I definitely think that first and foremost he adheres to this textualist interpretation of the Constitution. A lot of readings on him are kind of grammar Nazi if you read some of his actual writings, which in the law that's a completely legitimate standpoint to have in my opinion, but he definitely uses this kind of really deep dive into the wording of a law to couch his personal feelings, in my opinion, of protecting conservative Christian values first.
I think you're right. And to highlight that point, because Jeremy, I think you're absolutely right, is this idea that this is what makes him very similar to Scalia, is that generally on the Supreme Court you have two camps. You have these sort of living document activist liberal judges, people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or people like Stephen Breyer, people like John Paul Stevens, right? Mm-hmm. And then on the other end, you have what are called strict constructionalists or originalists, which are like Antonin Scalia and Neil Gorsuch. He's also, according to the Washington Post, he's also what's called a textualist, which I think is absolutely right, which is that, quote, believes that only the actual words written in a statute matter, not legislators' intent or any potential consequences of a judge's decisions. So when you were saying that he's sort of a grammar Nazi, you're absolutely right in the sense that what Gorsuch cares about, and this is what Scalia cared about too, is how was the law originally written? And trying to get to the bottom of what is the original intent of the law. Not what we want it to be, but what it actually was when it was passed into law by elected representatives.
Yeah, I'd hate to be at his Bible study because I'm sure he's an originalist on the Bible as well.
Let's fucking hope not. I mean, obviously he has no beard and he's cut his hair, so he's not much of an originalist in that regard. That's
very true, but like I said, his personal beliefs, I do not feel like I do think he separates those things. He's just his Episcopalian upbringing and his textualist analysis of the Constitution makes me think he would have to be similar in his reading of the Bible, which is dangerous, in my opinion, for anybody.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that was a key point is that often originalists hide behind the sort of textual framework of displaying their legal opinions, which may be often to the extreme. Right. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Aisha Khan, who's a legal director of the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, she said something along the lines of the argument of originalists like Gorsuch is always, well, I'm just following the law. But it's intellectually dishonest to pretend you can somehow divine the original founder's intent. And then she says further, It's also a notable coincidence that the originalist textualist philosophy always paves the way for religious messages by government or strikes down efforts to protect women's reproductive rights. It's a way of rationalizing activist tendencies. So one of the ways that we often frame this debate is that the activists are always on the liberal side. And I think that's complete bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that textualists and strict constructionists are just as activist as the living document contextualists on the left, in the sense that they may not have their own personal opinions override what their own legal decisions may be, but they do allow the personal views of the legislators who wrote the legislation to then undermine a real sense of change within the law. And so it becomes sort of a activism by fiat.
Beautifully put, Justin. I agree 100%.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you just couch what it's, it's like, I grew up in the church. People are, this is how it was written in the Bible back then. You have to take it at face value. And that was always really just couching their interpretation of history, which is often ahistorical, often fed into their own current beliefs about the world and into their personal decisions. So to act like just because you're a textualist or you're paying attention to legislative intent, you can't separate that out. You are an activist judge. I don't think the Supreme Court, as it stands today, is free from any activist judges when you really look at the legislative history, because they were picked for ideological reasons from either party, depending on the situation. So, that name calling, it's useless between judges.
I completely agree. And in fact, I would argue that all judges, to a lesser or greater extent, are activists. If you actually look at the history of the Supreme Court itself, the concept of judicial review is not something that's explicitly outlined in the Constitution. It's a legal framework developed by Chief Justice John Marshall, in that he used the sort of overly broad language of the judicial branch's power within the Constitution to establish a legal common precedent of judicial review, which at the time, there were very, very harsh critics of judicial review, particularly Thomas Jefferson, who thought that judicial review could be a way to usurp local power and a way to take away liberty from states, localities, and individuals in defense of sort of the national government. And in that regard, Marshall is sort of the original living, breathing activist, or the living document activist. So I think it's safe to say that, Gorsuch is going to be an activist because all of the justices tend to be activists in their own way. They sort of pick their own specific things that they care about. One specific thing that he does care about, that's kind of a weird thing and a technical thing, but it's very fascinating, is how he views administrative law. So administrative law is generally laws that are passed in order for institutions to then create regulations and further codes of conduct for the practice of administration of government. So laws to regulate the administration of the EPA or the USDA or the HHS. And there has been a standard legal principle, at least since the mid-1980s, of something called the Chevron rule. And what the Chevron rule argues is that the court should defer to administrations and institutions in the way in which they create regulations and administrative documents in relationship to the laws that originally passed. So say an administrative law is passed by Congress for the EPA, and it lays out broad outlines for what the administrative purposes of the organization are. If the EPA then creates these administrative laws, these administrative regulations, which don't have to be passed by Congress, it's generally accepted, or at least has generally been accepted, that the courts will say, we're going to defer to your administration standards so long as they do not overreach. Well, Gorsuch completely rejects this concept. He very much believes that, he even said, like, quote, "We lived in America before the administrative state, and we can live without it again." And so his whole argument has been, and this is actually what makes him more conservative than Scalia, because Scalia often actually did defer to the Chevron rule. But Gorsuch is actually saying, like, no, institutions should be more straitjacketed by legislative controls by Congress. They should not be allowed to just write regulations willy-nilly. So this is where this is even more conservative than Scalia. So this is something that's, while it's kind of a wonky, nerdy, specific thing to sort of focus on, this is going to mean a lot going forward for institutions like the EPA, where if they try to create some form of clean air and water standards, or some kind of climate change regulatory standards or energy standards, the court could then take up a case, and Gorsuch could be one of the deciding votes in favor of, say, a polluter over, say, the EPA. So I know that's kind of a very specific, wonky point, but I think it's something that matters in an age where it seems like science is sort of being under assault in our administrative capacities by the president. And so I don't think Gorsuch is going to help on that level.
Well, if the Republicans have their way, there will be no administrations for him to get picky about. But since he's 50, he's turning 50, he's probably going to be on this court for 30, 40 years. So that history, I feel like, will definitely come back full force after Trump presidency. But with the heads of the administration Trump is picking, I don't know if Gorsuch is going to have to be the last word on any of that stuff, really.
I think you're right. I do think you're right. Now, I do have a follow-up question for you, Jeremy, because this is so we've talked about sort of the legal and the implications of secularism here. But the other thing we haven't talked about quite yet is the political wing of this, which is that the Republicans, particularly Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have said that Democrats should just sort of suck it up and hear Gorsuch and confirm him because they lost the election. Now, last I checked, we had another Supreme Court nominee who was nominated to the court by President Obama in late 2015, and his name was Merrick Garland. And last I checked, the Republicans didn't even hold any meetings with him, or if they did, they were very sparingly, and they didn't even have confirmation hearings. So I would say to the Democrats, besides the obvious conservative political positions that Gorsuch holds, which I don't think are a tenable way to uphold, to sort of upend his nomination process, I think the main way to upend his nomination process is to say that this is a stolen Supreme Court seat.
I 100% agree. I mean, they got to be assholes. The disrespect shown to them was insane. And I was on Reddit looking at some Gorsuch stuff, and there's 100 different Trump patsies. I mean, there's 100 different whatever candidate patsies, but they were saying the same. They were like, I saw this one guy go through every thread and reply, Gorsuch is a textualist who cares about the Constitution and has a sterling record. How could you in any way want to, deny the nomination of him? That's just ridiculous. And I'm sitting like, okay, flashback 6 months ago, and the same thing Democrats would be saying about Merrick Garland, except for Merrick Garland was more of a centrist type of justice who would have had some balance on the court, as opposed to this guy who feeds into a political agenda, obviously. So since they've picked a candidate that doesn't have a single thing really wrong with his record or his personal life, he's a fine pick in a balanced America, I would say, hold the hearing and probably get confirmed. But right now, be assholes. Democrats need to be assholes. If they aren't assholes, they're going to lose their, the people that are still hanging on. Because until the 2018 midterms, those Democrats are the sole protection and blockage between the administration's agenda. And since Gorsuch so obviously fits into their agenda, what they're trying to do, you have to block. You have to do everything you can. And if the Republicans come back and what's the rule? They can't fill it. They'll have the nuclear option, where they can cut off the ability to filibuster this nomination, which is really one of the Democrats' last resorts anyway. if they pull that nuclear option, the next Democratic president, they can't filibuster nominations, so it shoots them in the foot. So I really think forcing their hand on this one is really what they got to do. I've heard people like, well, let's put the goalpost a little bit because, the next nominee might be even more terrible. And if we blow it on the nuclear option now where the Republicans just take over and decide for us, then they're going to decide each one after that. Either way, the outcome is the conservatives getting each one. No matter how long you wait for that, every single option there ends in at least probably two Supreme Court justices, given the age of the bench right now. Will be confirmed anyway.
Possibly three.
It'll be confirmed anyway. So you need to hold the fight now while there's energy. And if they don't hold the fight, then they're they're the gutless pieces of shit I think they are right now, for the most part, on the whole.
I agree. I mean, one of the things that is important to me with this nomination is that in a normal political universe, let's say, for example, that Donald Trump does not become the Republican nominee, and let's say Marco Rubio does, and Marco Rubio beats Hillary Clinton, and let's say Marco Rubio nominates Neil Gorsuch. And let's just even add on top of all that, let's say Scalia doesn't die until Rubio became president. We're doing some real alternative universe shit.
Yeah.
But let's say that that's the normal political calculus. Then the normal political calculus would be this guy should be unanimously confirmed.
Yeah, exactly.
In a normal political climate, in a normal political atmosphere, there is no way this guy should be held up. And the reason I say that is because for as much as I care about secular values, I do care about the balance of power. And I think it's quite important that sort of Democrats pick their fights. And I think this is one that they should fight on, because not so much because Gorsuch is a bad nominee. I think he's one of the best nominees that the conservatives could have put up. I think he's the best. I think anybody after him will not be as good, which is kind of a scary notion. And so with that in mind, the fact that Merrick Garland didn't even get meetings with Republicans for the most part, and didn't even get to even go into the confirmation process at all, that they should make Donald Trump force his hand. And one of the ways they can do that is to have Trump just seat him, which is what Obama could have done with Garland. But Obama respected the rule of law and the Constitution enough to say, no, we should get our advice and consent from the Senate on our confirmations.
Obama was obviously a dictator. Didn't you hear that? For 8 years. Sharia law was right around
Muslim
the corner.
From Kenya.
The Tea Party stopped it single-handedly.
The FEMA camps and the death panels, yeah.
Right? Oh man, yeah. In a normal political climate, confirm him. I don't like any of his record on religious freedom. He defers to Christian values, but you're right. Balance of power would assert. And what a situation we're in, where I'm daydreaming after you say, imagine Marco Rubio as president. What a wonderful world that would be.
I'm telling you right now, man, I would gladly take a Marco Rubio. I would gladly take a Jeb Bush. Mitt Romney.
Dude, I would be so happy with Jeb Bush if I was me and then I got to go back in time and the alternate reality changed to Jeb Bush. I would be so supportive of Jeb Bush, and I hate the Bush family in general, but I'd be so supportive of him. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, you're the best president ever in comparison to what could have been. But no, we got Trump.
You're right. And part of the way that the conservatives won, and part of the way that Trump won, was he won with evangelicals. He won 81% of evangelicals, which again gets to a point that I said in episode 7. Liberals, Democrats, and people who are non-religious, the nearly 24% of Americans who identify as non-religious, only half of that percentage voted in the 2012 elections. We don't have data yet in 2016. We only have data on the 2012 elections. Only half. If the other half voted, we wouldn't have President Trump right now. And that's the thing people need to keep in mind. Get registered to vote.
It's super easy.
And vote in the midterms. It's so easy. When you renew your driver's license, they will re-register you.
Well, I mean,
that's what they did for me.
In my area, particularly, it's fairly easy, although we do have some draconian laws on IDs, so I don't want to act like it's the easiest thing in the world. And I've had problems at
not.
the voting booth. Like, it's definitely not the greatest thing in the world. But, you know, if your employer tries to say that you waiting 2 hours at a voting booth is means for termination, or, I mean, obviously you're using 2 hours. It's harder than we're saying right here, but it's super easy. I just want.
I think you're right. In a lot of states, you can vote early. You can file an absentee ballot. I mean, this is what's important here, because the reason that we're in this clusterfuck right now, and the reason why we're probably going to have a Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch rather than a Supreme Court Justice Merrick Garland, is that people did not come out to vote.
Yep.
And the secular movement needs to do a better job of outreach to voting. It's something I think that's extremely important, because if we don't, then we're going to keep getting people like Gorsuch who, while if you're a conservative, if you're a libertarian, you will, I think, like his views of the administrative state and the view of strict constructionism with regards to the Constitution. But if you're somebody who believes in secularism, if you're somebody who believes in the separation of church and state, the real separation of church and state, and you actually believe in real religious freedom rather than religious privilege, then Neil Gorsuch is terrifying. And that's the thing that we need to like drive home with these people.
I completely agree. If we go back to what was it, like Summum versus Pleasant Grove City, and the ones where they were trying to get the Ten Commandment statues in the park you mentioned earlier. I mean, his responses to that were the Ten Commandments can be a secular moral message. It can hold a secular moral message. It can be a secular symbol of the rule of law. That roadside crosses with government insignias don't necessarily mean the government is endorsing one religion over the other. That's just ludicrous. That's not textualist. That's not originalist. That's just ludicrous. If you were going to have a secular symbol of the law, put Hammurabi's codes up or something like that. The Ten Commandments.
Or here's a fun fact. Put the fucking Constitution. Put the Declaration of Independence.
That's true,
like,
too.
Those are actual, if you want to make a monument to a document that represents secularism and human rights, you put the fucking Constitution instead of the Ten Commandments. Don't sit there and tell me that it's some secular historical rule of law when the first one is, I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not have other gods before me. I don't know what
that could be any god
law that applies to.
That could be any god. Oh, man.
And that was the argument that Justice Kennedy made in the case involving prayers at city council meetings. The name of the case is it's like right on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember. But anyway, like, we're going to see more of this shit if we get a Gorsuch on the court.
Oh, yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to... His arguments, when I was reading the actual briefs, for the fact that the Ten Commandments should not... Because the actual ruling in that case, or the actual case, was that if the government were to accept this donation from a church of the Ten Commandment statue, that they would have to put in... they would have to accept any petition by any other religious or, in that scheme of belief systems or whatever. They have to accept every other one. And he used that to basically say it was an undue burden on the government to require them to hold those other statues in there, because I think he said something about, well, wouldn't all the parks just be full of clutter? Or you can't, if someone's going to put up a war memorial, does that mean that you have to put up a memorial to Toys R Us or whatever, He definitely does write in a reasonable way to which you can understand. He has analogies in there, but I think they're dumb analogies, and I just can't accept the notion. My opinion there is just don't accept any of that shit. Don't put the monument up at all. Like, that's the easy fix there. Or put up our Constitution, put up the Bill of Rights, put up Declaration of Independence. I don't know, have a nice electronic touchscreen with all of the city's bylaws. I don't fucking know. But that's a much more secular symbol of the law than the 10 fucking commandments.
And I totally agree. I mean, in my opinion, the best option is nothing.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely nothing. And the thing that I don't understand is that for a man who is so incredibly fucking smart And he is. I mean, it's no doubt that this man is brilliant. To make the historical argument about the Ten Commandments is one of the dumbest things I've ever read. It was so crazy compared to the very technical and incredibly intellectual work he's done in specific points, where we can sort of debate the issue of whether or not do we want to have more of an administrative state or more of a limited government, night watchman state. Like, those are legitimate political philosophy questions. But this idea that somehow the Ten Commandments are an historical, or they allude to the moral principles or the higher laws of a land, that's absolute bullshit.
He said, quote, it can be seen as a secular symbol. That's crazy. Maybe if he made the historical argument, that'd be whatever. But he said, verbatim, could be a secular symbol. That's insanity. And that definitely shows his cognitive dissonance in that area, which is the whole reason why he has, why I would fight against him. Because he's definitely taking what is a very storied career. He's pretty consistent on principles, and then, fucking it over with that idea. It's like when Descartes, ripped down reality, talked about how our senses could be, a demon manipulating us, that we can't trust anything. And then he pigeonholes at the end, God, it must exist because reality is observable. You can have a very storied intellectual history. You can be very incisive. You can be very rational. And then you get to this point and your brain just shuts down.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I completely disagree with him on aid in dying, physician-assisted suicide. I think he's absolutely wrong on it. I think one of the cornerstone liberties that we should grant to citizens in a society is not just the right to life, but also the right to death.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do not allow someone to end their life, then you are taking a fundamental liberty away from them, which is that they have a right. It's a fundamental Enlightenment principle, and it's something that it belongs to American jurisprudence as well as English law, which is the idea of self-proprietorship, that you own your body, that your body belongs to you. And in my opinion, the idea that you're going to subvert the principle of self-proprietorship in defense of the state coming in and telling you that you cannot end your life, or that a woman cannot have a right to choose, is in complete violation of liberty, and in fact is often the very type of tyranny that people like Gorsuch should readily condemn. And that's part of the problem. And that's why I very much disagree with him on that. I mean, this is a guy who will not, in my opinion, probably will not be good on women's health issues and will not be good on abortion.
Yep. And couching it under religious freedom so that he doesn't take a position either way. He's just getting into the nitty-gritty of the law, guys. All he's doing is paying attention to the Constitution. No, it's a part of a legislative agenda, and he is the activist judge on the court. So that's the plan. If he is denied the nomination by some miracle because of Democratic maneuvering, there could be a worse one in there, but the worst one will have much more easily detectable activist positions. We will be able to, kind of character assassinate in a way the next pick down the line. I fully believe. Like, Gorsuch is the best of the best of the choices right now. And if the Democrats can hold firm and somehow delay his nomination or force another nomination, the next one down the line is going to be worse for conservatives, and it's going to be better for the left to crush, or to basically, get the American people not on the side of that.
I completely agree with you. And I'm going to echo the sentiments of, I think maybe Bill Maher said this, but I know a couple other people did. To me, at this particular stage, there is only one acceptable person that should be replacing Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court, and that is Merrick fucking Garland.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
They play dirty pool, and there has to be a response to that.
I
if
agree.
Our system wasn't so fucked up, maybe we could have a different conversation. But at the current standpoint, if the Democrats don't push back, it will just confirm every suspicion I have about them as a party at this moment, which is that they're useless, gutless, and do not have any kind of, they don't have any kind of base. Like, they're not talking to their base. They don't have a plan of attack. They don't have the principles that they need to have in this day and age. And if they're not going to speak up for us, I'm all for primarying them and getting some more fresh blood in 2018. And I think this is the litmus test for that.
I think you're right. I think you're very much right. And for those who are interested more in sort of what the Democrats can do, I highly recommend you listen to last week's episode, episode 7, where I talk with DNC chairman candidate Samuel Ronan about some of these very issues. Because I mean, I agree with you, Jeremy. I mean, part of the problem is the Democrats have been lazy, and they have been filled with hubris over the last 8 years, and they've let so much go. But I will say this: let's say the Democrats fight this tooth and nail, and Gorsuch does get confirmed. I'm not going to like it, but I'll live with the fact that at least the Democrats tried to stop it. But if they don't, at least they fought. But if they don't fight, then shame on them.
Right. I completely agree. Now we're getting pretty up there in time.
Yes, we are.
I do want to just tell our listeners that his mother has a very interesting life, Judge Neil Gorsuch.
Oh, yeah. We didn't even talk about her. She was
the first woman to head the EPA. Ronald Reagan appointed her. She had to resign 22 months later. There's some fun details in there. You even have some quotes from Gorsuch. But, I mean, she wanted to protect polluters. She wanted to deny all regulations. And
the short and dirty of it was that there was a she was only the EPA administrator for 22 months. She was appointed in 1981, and the reasons that she had to resign, because she would have been fired by President Reagan, was that she had misappropriated, what was it, something like $1 billion worth of funds for what were called Superfund.
It was the $1.6 billion slush fund for I believe it was when people pollute natural areas to use in legal defense. So. Or legal
the short
prosecution.
term for them is the short term of them is they're called Superfunds.
Okay.
And so she misappropriated Superfunds, and instead of basically defending her position, which her son Neil Gorsuch said, why did you didn't do anything wrong? Why did you quit? Why are you a quitter? We shouldn't quit, should we? But she resigned anyway, and part of it was political. I mean, I imagine, in 1983, the recession was still very bad. Reagan's popularity was not near where it would be in the few years. People were debating whether or not he'd even be elected to a second term. So at that time, any political sort of hit that they took, they had to sort of take in stride, and that was one of the ways they did it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a woman who was accused of misappropriating over $1 billion worth of money. And
fascinating story, though.
Absolutely fascinating. And fascinating in the sense that, like, Gorsuch is not one of those guys who sort of came out of nowhere. His parents were both high up within the Republican Party, and so he is a guy who, there's a great piece there's a great part in that Washington Post piece about how, like, when you're 12 years old and you're growing up watching the McLaughlin Group, you're just going to be different than regular kids.
Oh yeah, and he was a big debater. I'm sure in high school, but mostly in college. I thought that area of Gorsuch's life was pretty interesting. I read that one of his friends said in that same Washington Post piece that he would bring 10 students who were on his side and had been trained to applaud and cheer at the right moments. I've never been in a debate round where I got an audience to cheer for me, but I think we could say he's taken after the president in that regard.
Yeah, I was thinking about exactly that when President Trump spoke at he spoke at the CIA?
Yep, and he ceded his, I can believe, but that, if you read his history, you can't extrapolate too much from that, but that shows his political mind, which gets into him being an activist by being a textualist. His mother and his family history really points to how he is going to judge cases involving administrative law. I mean, you can get into... I think the reason why he has his interpretations of administrative law are probably rooted in events like his mother in the EPA. I believe his father had something to do with the transportation department, but that could be wrong. Just his family history is pretty interesting. I would highly suggest reading it to get a sense of where he's coming from.
Well, and I think you're right, Jeremy, in the sense that I think he's more shrewd than people will give him credit for.
Oh, yeah.
In the sense that, somebody in another piece said something along the lines of like, he sort of strikes me as being rather folksy and sort of common wisdom, regular guy, but make no mistake, he's dangerous, or something along those lines for religious freedom.
Oh, a kid who grew up debating around the table, who's now speaking as a common man. He is doing that because that fits into an agenda, his own personal agenda, about how he's going to get to how he's going to debate with the American populace in general, how he's going to push his position to the ultimate judges, which are the American people. So, he that kind of common man approach, I feel like is a way to also couch his activism behind the textualism and then the easy way to comprehend it and the analogies about dentist's office and dogs and coyotes. It's all there to kind of blind what his true goal is, which I feel like is a certain amount of conservative activism. Not the most terrible choice, but it definitely fits into a scheme I do not like overall with this administration.
I very much agree. I was not surprised to the extent to which the White House would completely acquiesce to the evangelical right. But goddamn, I mean, they went for it in the sense that between, DeVos and then Pruitt at EPA and now Gorsuch, I mean, it seems to me like they have a very clear philosophy about what they want to do.
With the most unclear of religious presidents like Donald Trump is ahistorical, amoral. He doesn't believe in anything but himself. Obviously, and he was able to swing the evangelicals. It just shows the hypocrisy of that political group. Not all.
I always make the joke that Donald Trump is a Christian to the extent to which he believes he is Jesus Christ.
Exactly. And if the right, this is a part of the right's nihilistic goals of bringing about the apocalypse or whatever weird cult fantasies they kind of ascribe to when you're in the pew. It's all this nihilistic. They think that they're doing this global chess match where they're making sure the pieces are aligned so Jesus will come back and save them. But I got news for them: the rapture was not even a thing until 1850. So the end of the world with all that shitty stuff happening, every single one of you will still be here. And if you commit suicide, you're going to hell. I'm just pointing that out.
But I will say that when the rapture does come, bring your pets over to my place. I'll take care of them.
That's right.
Because I won't be going. That's
right. Hey, there you go. Feed the goldfish. Feed the cats.
Feed the
dogs,
cat. Feed the dog. I'll take care of your pets.
You got a pet coyote, pet bear. You won't bring them around the schools because Devos has protected them with the armed guards. But
oh yeah. If she can shoot a bear, she'll probably shoot your dog.
Oh God. All right. Well, I think we've been through quite a bit.
Okay, there we go. We're back now. Anyway, what were we saying?
Technical difficulties. I believe I was trying to wrap up the show. So, hey guys, there were technical difficulties. This will probably be a little jarring, but
it will be edited in post.
Oh yeah, we're gonna edit it, but it's not gonna match with what we're talking about. Either way, that's the technical aspects of podcasting, guys. Next week we're going to be talking about the religion in the Cold War. We're going to contextualize current situations with Russia, Putin, Trump, Putin's bitch, as I like to call him, and it's going to be a fun time. So I will let Justin here kind of read you all of all the Facebook pages and all that good stuff, and then I'll sign off.
Thanks, Jeremy. Talk to you next week.
Yep. Good times. You have a good week.
Later.
See you guys.
All right. Follow us on Facebook at atheistallianceofamerica.com. We also have a new group page that you can join, Atheist Alliance of America Nation, AA of A Nation. You can join there on Facebook as well. Give our YouTube page a subscribe. Give our YouTube page a subscribe, like our videos, like our page, and also check out our affiliate, Philosophical Atheism. I'm an admin for them at philosophicalatheism.com. You can also check them out at facebook.com/philosophical atheism. They have an insiders group as well that you can join. And as always, until next week, this is Justin Clark, and this has been Secular Nation.